I wasn't supposed to be awake when I heard it. The pain medication usually knocked me out by 9, but that night my body refused to cooperate. I lay there in our bedroom, staring at the ceiling, when Daniel's voice drifted down the hallway from his office. "Yeah, it's done," he said, his tone casual, almost cheerful. "The house is just in my name now. All legal." My heart stopped. To support our community and help us continue to creating high-quality content, we'd love for you to like, share, comment, and subscribe to our channel. Your engagement helps our videos reach a wider audience and inform our algorithm about the type of content you enjoy. If you'd like to stay up to date on our latest videos and be part of our growing community, please hit the notification bell. Your support means the world to us, and we can't wait to share more content with you in the future. I held my breath, straining to hear more through the half-open door. The bed rest had been doctor's orders after the surgery, complete rest, no stress, minimal movement. Daniel had been so attentive those first few days, bringing me meals, fluffing my pillows, kissing my forehead. "I told you it would work," he continued, his voice growing smug. While she was on bed rest, she signed whatever I put in front of her. She trusted me completely. A laugh, cold and unfamiliar. It's honestly a relief. Now I can move forward without complications. I stared at the white ceiling, my body frozen beneath the sheets. The stitches in my abdomen throbbed with each heartbeat. My hands gripped the comforter, knuckles white. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. But his voice kept going, discussing timelines and plans, and with each word, something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet, sickening split, like discovering the foundation you built your entire life on had been hollow all along. The next morning, Daniel brought me breakfast. He set the tray carefully across my lap, scrambled eggs, toast, orange juice, and kissed my forehead like he'd done every morning since I came home from the hospital. His smile was warm, practiced, perfect. "How are you feeling today?" he asked, adjusting the pillows behind my back. "Any pain?" I watched him the way you watch a stranger who somehow knows your name. Every gesture felt scripted. Every word felt rehearsed. "Daniel," I said quietly, my voice still scratchy from sleep. "Did something change with the house paperwork?" His hand paused for just a fraction of a second on the pillow. Then he smiled. "Oh, that." He waved dismissively. "Just some refinancing stuff. I handled it while you were recovering. Didn't want to stress you out with all the details. But my name. It's just easier this way," he interrupted gently, sitting on the edge of the bed. "You know how complicated these things get. I streamlined everything. You trust me, don't you?" The question hung in the air between us. I nodded slowly, because I was too weak to do anything else. Too shocked to process what I'd heard last night. Too medicated to form the right questions. "Good," he said, patting my hand. "That's my girl. Just focus on getting better." That night, after Daniel fell asleep beside me, I reached for my laptop. My hands shook as I typed in the county property records website. The loading screen felt like it took hours. When the results finally appeared, I had to read them 3 times before they became real. Owner, Daniel Holloway. My name wasn't listed anywhere. Not as co-owner. Not as former interest. Not even a footnote. I scrolled through the document history. 2 weeks ago, right after my surgery, there'd been a transfer. A quitclaim deed. My signature was there, scrawled and shaky, barely recognizable. I remembered that day vaguely through the medication fog. Daniel had brought me papers, said something about refinancing to get a better rate. I'd signed because my hands were trembling and my vision was blurry, and I trusted him. Now, staring at the screen, I understood what I'd actually signed. What he'd actually done. This house, the one my mother had helped us buy, the one I'd poured my savings into, the one I'd painted and decorated and called home for 8 years, was no longer mine. I closed the laptop slowly and turned my face toward the wall. Silent tears soaked into the pillowcase. This wasn't a mistake. This was erasure. Over the next week, Daniel changed. Small things at first. He started locking his phone, keeping it face down on the counter. He stopped asking my opinion about dinner or weekend plans. He began referring to the house as my place in casual conversation. "I need to fix the fence at my place. The property taxes on my house went up. Once, When I asked where he was going at 10 o'clock at night, he just smiled and said, "Out. Don't worry about it. You need to rest." I did rest. And I listened. Late at night, I heard him whispering on phone calls in the garage. I smelled unfamiliar perfume on his jacket when he thought I was asleep. I watched him move through the house like someone who'd already won a game I didn't know we were playing. He grew careless with his laptop, leaving it open on the kitchen counter. One afternoon, while he was in the shower, I saw an email thread with a real estate agent. Subject line, listing timeline for 428 Maple Drive. Our address. He was planning to sell the house. My house. Our house. The house that, according to the county, was now only his. One afternoon, desperate for something to occupy my mind, I asked Daniel to bring me a box from the garage. "Just some old files," I said weakly. I thought I could organize them. Something to do. He didn't even glance at the box as he carried it in, setting it beside the bed with a distracted kiss on my cheek before heading back to his office for another important call. Inside were years of forgotten paperwork, old utility bills, tax returns from when we first bought the house, insurance documents. I sorted through them slowly, my body still aching with every movement. Then, at the very bottom, I found it. A thick manila folder, its edges worn and corners bent. On the tab, written in my own handwriting from 8 years ago, "House, original purchase." My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were the original mortgage documents, the inspection reports, the closing statement. And there, paper clipped to a faded yellow legal pad with my mother's handwriting, was something I'd completely forgotten about. A document titled, Spousal Equity Protection Affidavit. My mother's voice echoed in my memory. "Always protect yourself, Maggie. I love Daniel, but love doesn't pay mortgages. This money is yours." 2 weeks after I found my name erased from the deed, a bank envelope arrived. It was addressed only to Daniel, but it slipped out of the mail stack I was sorting, the seal already loose. Inside was a refinance statement. The number made the room tilt. Daniel hadn't just refinanced the house. He'd pulled out nearly all the equity, $240,000. I stared at the page, my vision blurring. That money wasn't sitting in our savings account. It wasn't earmarked for roof repairs or the kitchen renovation we discussed. According to the statement, it had been dispersed 3 weeks ago, right after my surgery, right after he'd removed my name from the deed. My hand shook so badly, I nearly dropped the paper. I thought about our joint checking account, the one I could still access from my phone. I pulled it up, scrolling through recent transactions. Nothing. No large deposit. No explanation. The money was gone. $240,000 of equity, half of which should have been mine, had vanished into accounts I couldn't see. That's when I understood this wasn't just about removing my name. It was about removing me entirely. And he'd been planning it for a long time. When Daniel came home that evening, I was ready. "Where did the refinance money go?" I asked quietly, watching his face as he set down his keys. He didn't flinch, didn't hesitate, didn't even look surprised that I knew. "Debt consolidation," he said smoothly, opening the refrigerator. "You know how tight things have been. Credit cards, the car loan. I handled it." I nodded slowly, pretending to accept the lie. But I'd already checked our credit card statements. Our balances were the same as they'd been 6 months ago. The car was paid off last year. There was no debt that justified $240,000. "That's good," I said softly. "I was worried." He smiled, relieved. "See, I've got everything under control. You don't need to stress about any of this. Just focus on healing." I smiled back, and he kissed my forehead before heading upstairs to shower. After he left the room, I sat very still, staring at the wall. He was lying, easily, comfortably, like he'd done it 100 times before, and he had no idea I was starting to see through it. The first time I heard her laugh, it came from my kitchen. I was lying in bed, trying to nap, when I heard the front door open. Daniel's voice, warm and animated, followed by lighter footsteps. High heels clicking on our hardwood floors. "This is Maggie," Daniel said loudly, as if introducing a piece of furniture. "She's recovering from surgery. Maggie, this is Vanessa. She's going to stay for a few days to help out around the house." I stared at the woman in the doorway. She was younger than me, late 20s maybe, with perfect makeup and designer jeans. Her smile was bright and pitying all at once. "It's so nice to meet you," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "Daniel's told me so much about your situation. I'm happy to help however I can." My situation. Like I was a problem to be managed. "Thank you," I whispered, because what else could I say? That night, I lay awake listening to them laugh together in the living room. Listening to her footsteps in my kitchen, her voice in my hallway. She didn't go home. I heard her showering in the guest bathroom. Heard Daniel bringing her coffee in the morning. And for the first time since the surgery, I cried. Silent, desperate tears that soaked into my pillow while my husband hosted another woman in her home. Something hardened in me after that night. The tears stopped. The shock faded. What remained was cold, clarifying anger. Daniel expected me to be weak. He expected tears, confrontation, emotional breakdowns. He expected me to be the same woman who'd signed away her rights while medicated and trusting. So I gave him none of it. I smiled when spoken to. I thanked Vanessa for bringing me lunch. I asked Daniel about his day. I played the role of the grateful, recovering wife. And I watched. I watched how Vanessa moved through my house like she belonged here. I watched how Daniel's hand lingered on her lower back. I watched how they exchanged glances when they thought I wasn't looking. I watched, and I listened, and I stayed silent. Because silence, I was learning, could be its own kind of weapon. Vanessa stayed for 5 days. When she finally left, Daniel seemed almost disappointed. "She was helpful, wasn't she?" he asked that night. "Very," I agreed, my voice soft and even. He smiled, satisfied that I'd accepted the situation without question. He had no idea I was building a case with every word he spoke. Late one night, when Daniel was snoring beside me, I pulled out the manila folder again. The spousal equity protection affidavit sat on top of the stack. I read it by the glow of my phone, my heart pounding. It was simple, really. When my mother had died, she'd left me $40,000 with one condition: that it be used toward our house down payment, and that my equity interest be legally protected through this document. I remembered signing it at the lawyer's office. My mother had insisted, despite Daniel's protests, that it was unnecessary. "I'm not saying Daniel would ever do anything wrong," she said gently. "But marriages change, sweetheart. Money changes people. This is just insurance." I thought she was being paranoid. Now, 8 years later, I understood she'd been protecting me. The affidavit was dated, notarized, and filed with the county. It specifically stated that my $40,000 contribution created a protected equity interest that couldn't be dissolved without my explicit, informed consent that required independent legal counsel. Daniel had removed my name from the deed, but he'd forgotten about this document, or maybe he'd never known it existed at all. I took photos of every page, uploading them to a secure cloud account. Then I carefully returned the folder to its hiding spot. The next morning, I called my college roommate Beth. "Can I borrow your phone?" I asked when she came to visit. "Mine's acting weird and I need to make a call." She handed it over without question. I stepped outside for the first time in 3 weeks, my body aching with every movement. The fresh air felt surreal after being trapped inside. I dialed the number for Patricia Chun. No, wait, I can't use Chun. Let me use Patricia Wallace, a family law attorney whose ad I'd seen online. "This is hypothetical," I started, my voice shaking. If someone's name was removed from a house deed while they were incapacitated, but they had a spousal equity affidavit on file. "Stop," the attorney interrupted gently. "Do you still have that document?" "Yes." "Good," she said, and I could hear her sitting up straighter. "Because that changes everything. That document creates a legally protected interest that can't be erased with a quitclaim deed, especially not one signed under duress or incapacity." My knees felt weak. I sat down on the front steps. "What do I do?" I whispered. "First, don't tell anyone you've talked to me. Second, document everything. And third, when you're ready, we file." I thanked her and hung up, staring at Beth's phone in my trembling hands. For the first time in weeks, I felt something other than fear. I felt hope. Over the next 2 weeks, Daniel grew bolder. Vanessa came back. This time, she didn't pretend to be helping. She just moved through the house like she owned it, redecorating small things, rearranging furniture. Daniel stopped hiding his phone calls. I heard him discussing selling timelines with the real estate agent. He talked openly about after the house sells, like I wasn't even there. Once, while bringing me dinner, he said casually, "You should probably start thinking about where you'll go. You know, once you're recovered enough to live on your own." I looked up at him, fork frozen halfway to my mouth. "Where I'll go?" "Well, yeah." He shrugged. "This place will sell fast. We'll both need to find new spots." Except he'd already removed my name. Except he'd already taken all the equity. Except he'd already decided my future without me. "I understand," I said quietly. And I did understand. I understood exactly what he'd planned. He smiled, relieved. "I knew you'd be reasonable about this." I smiled back, and he left the room feeling accomplished. He had no idea his confidence would be his downfall. The divorce papers arrived on a Tuesday morning. Daniel stood in the bedroom doorway, arms crossed, a manila envelope in his hand. His expression was almost apologetic, but not quite. "I've already talked to a lawyer," he said, tossing the envelope onto the bed. "This'll be quick and clean. No fighting, no drama. You'll get a fair settlement." I stared at the envelope, my heart racing. "A fair settlement?" "Yeah. Enough to get you started somewhere new." "I'm not heartless, Maggie." I picked up the envelope slowly, my hands steadier than they'd been in weeks. "What about the house?" "The house is mine," he said simply. "But don't worry, you'll get your share of other stuff." "Other stuff?" "Like I was entitled to some old furniture and kitchenware as compensation for 8 years of marriage and $40,000 of my inheritance." "Okay," I said quietly. "I'll read through it." He seemed surprised by my calm. "Really? No argument?" I shook my head. "I'm too tired to fight, Daniel. You win." The smile that spread across his face made my stomach turn. "I'm glad you're being mature about this." After he left, I opened the envelope and read every single page. Then I made a phone call to Patricia Wallace. "He just filed," I said. "It's time." 3 days later, a for sale sign appeared on our front lawn. I watched from the bedroom window as the real estate agent pounded it into the ground. Daniel stood beside her, gesturing enthusiastically at the house's features: the new roof, the landscaping, the location. Within 2 days, there was interest. A young couple toured the house while I stayed hidden in the bedroom, listening to Daniel's sales pitch through the walls. "This house has been perfectly maintained," he told them. "And the price is competitive because I'm motivated to sell quickly. Motivated to sell my house quickly." The couple loved it. They made an offer that same day. Daniel was ecstatic. I heard him on the phone with Vanessa that night, celebrating. "It's happening," he said. "By next month, this'll all be behind us." What he didn't know was that the title company had already started their research. And they'd found something. A protected equity interest. Filed 8 years ago. Still active. One that Daniel had conveniently forgotten to disclose. The call came on a Thursday afternoon. I was in the bedroom when I heard Daniel's phone ring. He answered it in his usual confident tone, but within seconds, his voice changed. "What do you mean? Unresolved interest?" he demanded, pacing the hallway. "I own this house. It's just my name on the deed." Silence. "That's impossible." "She signed everything." More silence. I could hear the agent's voice through the phone, calm and professional, explaining something that was clearly dismantling Daniel's plans. "Well, figure it out," he shouted. "The sale closes in 3 weeks." He ended the call and stood in the hallway, breathing hard. I could see his shadow under the bedroom door, could feel his frustration radiating through the walls. Finally, he went downstairs. I heard him making frantic calls to his lawyer, to the real estate agent, to anyone who might fix his problem. I sat very still, my heart pounding with something that felt almost like joy. The title company had found my mother's affidavit. They'd found the protected equity interest. And they couldn't issue clear title until it was resolved. Daniel's clean. Easy sale had just become very complicated. And he still had no idea I'd been preparing for this all along. That evening, Daniel stormed into the bedroom. His face was flushed, his eyes wild with anger I'd never seen before. "What did you do?" he demanded. I looked up from the book I was pretending to read. "What do you mean?" "You know exactly what I mean. That document, that equity thing from your mother, you knew it was there." I blinked slowly, keeping my face neutral. I assumed you handled all that when you refinanced. Don't play stupid, Maggie. You knew this would block the sale. I set down my book carefully. Daniel, I've been on bed rest for 6 weeks. I've barely been able to walk to the bathroom. How would I have done anything? He stared at me, searching my face for lies. But I'd practiced this expression in the mirror. Confused, innocent, exhausted. The lawyer said you need to sign a release, he said finally, his voice tight. To clear the title. Okay, I said softly. I'll sign whatever you need. His expression shifted, suspicion mixing with relief. Really? Really? I don't want to make this harder than it has to be. He nodded slowly, but I could see he didn't quite believe me. Good. Let him wonder. The divorce proceedings moved forward, and with them came discovery. Court-ordered financial disclosure meant Daniel had to provide bank statements, credit card records, investment accounts, everything. I watched his lawyer's face change when she reviewed the documents. The refinance proceeds, the wire transfers, the luxury hotel charges, the rent payments for Vanessa's apartment. $240,000, tracked and documented. None of it went to debt consolidation. None of it went to home repairs. All of it went to funding an affair and a new life he'd been building while I recovered from surgery. Patricia Wallace sat across from me in her office, spreading the papers across her desk like evidence at a crime scene. He refinanced the house, removed your name, and spent the marital assets on his mistress, she said quietly, while you were medically incapacitated and unable to consent. I stared at the papers, feeling numb. Seeing it all laid out like this, the receipts, the transfers, the timeline, made it real in a way that still took my breath away. The judge is going to have questions, Patricia said. Lots of questions. The first hearing was on a cold morning in October. I sat beside Patricia in the courtroom, my hands folded in my lap. Daniel sat across the aisle with his lawyer, who looked increasingly uncomfortable. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Judge Morrison. No, I can't use Morrison. Judge Brennan. She read through the submitted documents in silence, her expression unreadable. Then she looked up at Daniel. Mr. Holloway, she said slowly, you refinanced the marital home while your wife was on medical bed rest following surgery. Yes, Your Honor, but... And you removed her from the title during the same period? It was a cleaner process, and you withdrew $240,000 in equity, which you then spent on... She glanced at the papers. Luxury travel, rent for a third party, and jewelry purchases? Daniel's lawyer stood. Your Honor, my client was making financial decisions for the household, while his wife was incapacitated and unable to consent. Judge Brennan interrupted. I've reviewed the hospital records. Mrs. Holloway was on prescription pain medication that would have impaired her judgment during the signing period. The look she gave Daniel could have frozen fire. We'll address this further at trial, she said quietly. But I have concerns. The house sale collapsed within a week. The buyer's lawyer had reviewed the title issue and advised them to walk away. Too complicated, too risky, too much potential for litigation. Daniel was furious. He tried to find new buyers, but every real estate attorney who reviewed the title came back with the same answer. Not until the equity interest is resolved. And I wasn't signing anything. Patricia had advised me carefully, you have a protected interest in this home. Don't sign it away for nothing. So when Daniel's lawyer sent over a release form offering me $5,000 to clear the title, I declined. When they came back with $10,000, I declined again. When they offered $20,000 and begged me to be reasonable, Patricia sent back a counteroffer. Full accounting of the refinance proceeds, equitable division of marital assets, and restoration of my ownership interest. Daniel's lawyer stopped responding after that. The house sat on the market, unsellable, while Daniel's perfect plan crumbled around him. I'd been erased from the title, but I'd never been erased from the law. At the next hearing, Judge Brennan made her decision. Given the circumstances of the title transfer, the medical incapacity of Mrs. Holloway at the time of signing, and the subsequent disposal of marital assets, I'm granting Mrs. Holloway exclusive use of the marital home pending final disposition. Daniel's face went white. Your Honor, that's my house. According to the evidence, Judge Brennan interrupted, It's a marital asset with a protected equity interest held by your wife. An interest you failed to disclose when refinancing and attempting to sell. She looked at him over her reading glasses. Mr. Holloway, you have 30 days to vacate the premises. You may arrange a time with Mrs. Holloway's counsel to collect your personal belongings. Daniel stood frozen, his lawyer pulling at his sleeve to sit down. But I have nowhere. I suggest you make arrangements, the judge said. This hearing is concluded. I sat perfectly still, afraid that if I moved I might shatter. Patricia squeezed my hand under the table. 30 days. After 8 years of marriage, 6 weeks of betrayal, and a month of legal warfare, I'd won the first battle. The house was mine again. The first night alone in the house was strange. Daniel had moved out 3 days earlier, taking only his clothes and personal items. He'd left in silence, not looking at me as he loaded boxes into his car. Vanessa had helped him. I watched from the window as she carried his suits on hangers, her face tight with barely concealed anger. Now they were gone, and the house was quiet. Not empty, not lonely, just quiet. I walked through the room slowly, touching walls I'd painted, running my hands over furniture I'd chosen. The guest room where I'd hidden during showings. The kitchen where I'd overheard his betrayal. The bedroom where I'd cried into my pillow while he slept beside me, dreaming of his new life. This house held ghosts of the woman I'd been, but it also held the promise of who I might become. I made tea and sat in the living room, watching the sunset through windows that were mine again. The fear that had lived in my chest for 2 months was gone. What remained was something quieter but stronger. Peace, not the loud kind, not the celebratory kind, just the steady, sure knowledge that I'd survived, that I'd fought back, that I'd won. Vanessa left Daniel 2 weeks later. I heard about it through Beth, who'd heard it from a mutual friend. Apparently, the money had dried up. The refinance proceeds were frozen in accounts Daniel could no longer access without court approval. His credit cards were maxed out. The luxury lifestyle he'd promised her evaporated overnight. She just moved out. Beth told me over coffee. Didn't even say goodbye to him. Just packed up and left. I felt nothing when I heard it. No satisfaction. No sympathy. Just a distant, detached awareness that the woman who'd walked through my kitchen in designer jeans was gone. Love built on money rarely survives bankruptcy. Daniel tried calling me after she left. I didn't answer. He sent emails asking if we could talk things through. I forwarded them to Patricia. He wants to reconcile, Patricia said dryly. Or more likely, he wants back into the house. Tell him no, I said. She smiled. Already done. Whatever Daniel had imagined his life would be after he erased me from the deed, this wasn't it. No house. No girlfriend. No money. No easy escape. Just consequences. The final ruling came in December, 3 months after I'd first overheard that phone call. Judge Brennan had reviewed all the evidence. The affidavit, the medical records, the financial statements, the timeline of events. She'd listened to testimony from my doctor about my post-surgical state. She'd reviewed the refinance documents and the disposal of funds. Her written opinion was 12 pages long. In it, she found that the quitclaim deed I'd signed was invalid due to incapacity and lack of informed consent. She found that my protected equity interest remained intact and had been violated by the refinance. She found that Daniel had acted in bad faith by concealing the affidavit from the lender and the title company. The house was declared a marital asset with my protected interest fully restored. Daniel was ordered to either buy out my interest at fair market value or agree to sell the house and split the proceeds, minus my $40,000 protected equity, which would come to me off the top. He had 60 days to decide. I sat in Patricia's office, reading the decision over and over, barely believing it was real. You won, Patricia said softly. Completely. I nodded, tears sliding down my cheeks. Not tears of sadness, tears of relief, so profound I could barely breathe through them. The consequences kept coming. Because Daniel had refinanced the house by failing to disclose my equity interest, the lender filed a claim for fraud. Their loan had been based on false information that Daniel was the sole owner with sole equity. Daniel's lawyer tried to argue that he hadn't known about the affidavit, but the evidence showed otherwise. My mother had sent him a copy 8 years ago, attached to an email that was recovered during discovery. He'd known. He just assumed it wouldn't matter. Judge Brennan ordered him to pay my legal fees, $32,000, as a penalty for acting in bad faith. His credit was ruined. His bank accounts were frozen pending the property settlement. The real estate agent sued him for breach of contract when the sale fell through. Everything he built by erasing me collapsed in on itself. I watched it happen from a distance, feeling neither joy nor sorrow. Just a quiet recognition that actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences are perfectly proportional to the harm intended. He tried to erase me. Instead, he'd erased himself. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I refinanced the house myself. This time, the process was different. This time, I sat across from the loan officer as the sole owner, signing papers with my name and my name alone. This time, there was no one whispering plans behind my back. No one plotting to remove my rights while I recovered from surgery. No one assuming I was too weak or too trusting to notice. The mortgage was approved in 3 days. When the title company sent me the final documents, I stared at my name on the deed until my vision blurred. Owner, Margaret Holloway. Not Margaret and Daniel. Just Margaret. Me. I bought out Daniel's interest using the equity from the refinance and a small loan from Beth. He'd taken the money without argument. He needed it to settle debts and legal fees. The house was entirely, completely, legally mine. I carried the deed to my mother's grave that weekend and sat in the grass beside her headstone. You were right, I whispered. About everything. Thank you for protecting me, even after you were gone. The wind rustled through the trees, and for just a moment, I felt her there beside me. The divorce was finalized on a rainy Tuesday in March. There were no dramatic courtroom scenes, no tearful confrontations, just signatures on documents, witnessed by a bored clerk in a municipal building. Daniel didn't show up. His lawyer signed on his behalf and left immediately. I stood in the courthouse hallway afterward, holding my copy of the divorce decree. 8 years of marriage, reduced to 12 pages of legal language. Patricia walked me to my car. How are you feeling? I thought about it. Free, I said finally. Tired, but free. She smiled. You should be proud of yourself. A lot of people would have given up. I unlocked my car and paused. I almost did. That first night, when I heard him on the phone, I wanted to disappear. I wanted to believe it wasn't real. But you didn't. No, I agreed. I didn't. I drove home, to my house, my space, my future, and didn't look back. There was nothing behind me worth seeing anymore. I repainted the bedroom first. The walls had been a pale blue that Daniel had chosen. I'd never liked it, but I'd gone along with his preference because that's what I'd always done. Now, I painted them a warm cream with soft gray undertones. I bought new bedding, white and simple in mine. I hung pictures I'd kept in storage because he'd said they didn't match his aesthetic. The room transformed. Every brush stroke felt like reclaiming space. Every new piece of furniture felt like choosing myself. Beth came over to help me move the bed away from the wall, and we found a dusty photo album wedged behind the headboard. Inside were pictures from our wedding. Daniel and me, young and smiling. My mother in her blue dress, beaming with pride. Friends and family I barely saw anymore. I looked at those photos for a long time. The girl in them seemed like a stranger, so trusting, so certain everything would work out. Do you want to keep these? Beth asked gently. I closed the album. No, but I don't need to burn them either. They're just the past. We put the album in a box in the garage, along with other remnants of a life I no longer lived. 3 months after the divorce, I hosted my first dinner party. I invited Beth, my cousin Amy, and 2 friends from my book club I'd stopped seeing during the marriage. Women I'd let fade from my life because Daniel always had some reason we couldn't make plans. They arrived with wine and laughter and stories, filling my house with warmth I'd forgotten was possible. We ate pasta I'd made from scratch. We drank too much wine. We talked about books and jobs and dreams and failures. No one mentioned Daniel unless I brought him up, and I didn't bring him up. He was a chapter I'd closed, a footnote in my history. As my friends laughed in my living room, I stood in the kitchen for a moment, listening. This house had been so quiet for so long, so full of whispered plans and hidden betrayals. Now it was full of joy, and it was mine. All of it. Beth found me there and wrapped an arm around my shoulders. You did it, she whispered. You really did it. I nodded, tears pricking my eyes. I did. Your mom would be so proud. I thought of the affidavit that had saved me, the protection she'd insisted on, even when it seemed paranoid. Yeah, I said softly. She would be. A letter arrived in May, forwarded from Daniel's lawyer. It was a loan rejection notice for a mortgage application. Daniel had tried to buy a condo and been denied due to the judgment against him and his destroyed credit. I stared at the letter, feeling nothing. A year ago, I would have felt guilty. I would have wondered if I'd been too harsh, if I should have helped him somehow. Now I just felt tired. He'd made his choices. He'd gambled that I was too weak or too trusting to fight back. He'd erased my name, spent my equity, and planned a future that didn't include me. The consequences weren't my doing. They were his. I threw the letter away and went back to the garden I was planting in the backyard. Tomatoes and basil and flowers my mother used to grow. His struggles weren't my responsibility anymore. My healing was. Sometimes, late at night, I still thought about that moment. The moment I overheard his voice in the hallway, casual and cruel, discussing how he'd removed my name while I was too weak to resist. I remember the feeling of my world cracking apart, the certainty that I'd lost everything, the fear that I'd never get it back. But I had gotten it back. Not all of it. Not the marriage or the trust or the 8 years I'd spent building a life with someone who'd been plotting to erase me. But I'd gotten back the house, my equity, my dignity, my future. I sat in the same bed where I'd cried silent tears while he slept beside me. But now the sheets were different. The walls were different. The woman lying there was different. Stronger, not because I'd become ruthless or cold, but because I'd learned to protect myself, to document everything, to stay quiet when silence was strategic and speak up when truth was required. I'd learned that trust should be earned, not assumed, and that sometimes the quietest victories are the most complete. What Daniel lost wasn't just the house. He lost his reputation, his credit, his relationship, his carefully constructed future. His job let him go quietly after the legal issues became public. The fraud claim against the refinance followed him like a shadow. Friends who'd celebrated his new start with him disappeared when the money ran out. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he was living in a small apartment, working a job well below his previous position, trying to rebuild from nothing. A part of me, small but persistent, felt sorry for him. He destroyed his own life chasing something that was already his. If he'd been honest, if he'd asked for a divorce before erasing me, we could have divided things fairly. We could have both moved on with dignity intact. Instead, he'd chosen deception. And deception had cost him everything. But my sympathy was limited and distant, like feeling bad for a stranger I'd read about in the news. His choices weren't my burden to carry anymore. What I kept was more than just the house. I kept my self-respect, my ability to trust myself, my understanding that I could be hurt and still survive, that I could be betrayed and still fight back. I kept the lessons my mother had taught me, even the ones I hadn't understood until I needed them. I kept my friendships, rebuilding connections I'd let fade. I kept my independence, hard-won and precious. And I kept my home, not just the physical structure, but the sense of safety it represented. The knowledge that these walls belonged to me, that no one could take them away while I was too weak to notice. The mortgage was in my name. The deed was in my name. The future was mine to build, and I was building it carefully with better foundations this time. Not on trust alone, but on documentation. Not on assumptions, but on evidence. Not on what people promised, but on what they proved. I was building a life that belonged entirely to me. I thought of my mother often now. Her voice in my head, always protect yourself. At the time, I'd thought she was being cynical, distrustful. She'd liked Daniel. She'd welcomed him into our family, celebrated our marriage, included him in holidays. But she'd also made me sign that affidavit. She'd also insisted I keep my own bank account. She'd also told me, more than once, that love and law were two different things, and ignoring the law in favor of love was how people got hurt. I used to think that mindset was sad, unromantic, a way of protecting yourself that made real intimacy impossible. Now I understood she was just being realistic. She'd seen enough in her life, her own divorce, her friends' struggles, the women she'd helped through her volunteer work, To know that protection wasn't the same as distrust. It was wisdom. And her wisdom had saved me when nothing else could. I visited her grave more often now, bringing flowers and sitting in the grass beside her headstone. You were right, I told her every time. About all of it. Thank you. Peace didn't arrive like a thunderclap. It didn't announce itself with fanfare or celebration. It didn't feel like winning, exactly. It just settled in, quietly, like dust finding its place after a storm. I woke up one morning, months after the divorce was finalized, after the house was refinanced in my name, after the legal battles ended, and realized I felt okay. Not ecstatic, not triumphant, just okay. The pain in my chest when I thought about Daniel had faded to a dull ache, then to nothing at all. The anger that had fueled me through the legal proceedings had burned itself out, leaving only tired acceptance. He tried to erase me and he'd failed. That was enough. I didn't need revenge beyond the natural consequences of his actions. I didn't need him to suffer more than he already had. I didn't need closure or apologies or explanations. I just needed him to be gone from my life. And he was. So I sat in my kitchen that morning, drinking coffee in the house that was mine, watching sunlight stream through windows I'd cleaned myself, and felt peace. Quiet. Steady. Mine. The last time I heard Daniel's name, it was barely a whisper. I was at a work function, making small talk with a colleague, when someone mentioned him in passing. Something about a mutual connection, a new job in another city. I nodded politely, letting the conversation move on without comment. Later, I realized I'd felt nothing. No curiosity about where he'd gone or what he was doing. No anger or bitterness about what he'd done. No lingering attachment to the man I'd spent 8 years married to. Just nothing. He'd become background noise. A footnote in a story I'd already finished reading. And that realization was more freeing than any court victory. I'd won not just the legal battle, but the emotional one too. I'd reclaimed not just my house, but my peace of mind, my sense of self, my future. He couldn't hurt me anymore because I'd stopped giving him space in my thoughts. He was simply gone, and I was simply here, living the life I'd fought to keep. The house was quiet now, but it wasn't lonely. I'd learned the difference. Quiet was the sound of safety, of peace, of space that belonged entirely to me, where I could think and breathe and exist without performing for anyone. Loneliness was what I'd felt during the marriage, surrounded by someone who'd already left me in his mind, sleeping beside someone who was plotting my erasure. This quietness was different. It was full of potential, of choices I made for myself, of decorations I chose and routines I built, and a future I was creating on my own terms. I worked in the garden. I read on the porch. I invited friends over when I wanted company and enjoyed the silence when I wanted solitude. The house was mine in a way it had never been when I'd shared it. Not just legally, not just financially, but emotionally, spiritually, completely. And in the stillness of my home, I'd found something I'd lost somewhere in the marriage myself. Not the version of me who'd bent and compromised and stayed silent to keep the peace. The version who'd fought back, who documented everything, who'd refused to disappear quietly. If I could go back and tell myself anything, the woman lying in that bed, overhearing her husband's betrayal, feeling her world crumble, it would be this. You're stronger than you know. You will fight back, and you will win. That document you barely remember signing, it will save you. That mother who insisted on protecting you, she knew. The silence you're about to embrace, it will become your weapon. The paperwork you're about to organize, it will become your evidence. You will survive this. More than survive, you will reclaim everything he tried to take. Not because you're ruthless, not because you're vengeful, but because you're prepared, because you're patient, because you understand that the law protects people who protect themselves, because your mother taught you to document, to plan, to never assume love was enough to keep you safe. And when it's all over, when the house is yours and the divorce is final and he's gone from your life entirely, you will sit in your kitchen and drink coffee and feel peace. Real peace. The kind that comes from knowing you fought for yourself and won. I stood in the doorway of my house on a sunny afternoon in August, watching the light pour across the hardwood floors I'd refinished. This was mine. Every corner, every memory, every future moment that would happen within these walls. I'd lost a marriage. I'd lost years to someone who didn't deserve them. I'd lost the version of myself who believed that trust alone could protect me. But I'd gained so much more. I'd gained strength I didn't know I had, resilience that surprised me, the ability to fight back when fighting seemed impossible. I'd gained the knowledge that I could survive betrayal and come out stronger. I'd gained a home that was truly mine. And I'd gained the most important thing of all, the certainty that I would never again let someone erase me while I was too weak or too trusting to notice. This house wasn't just wood and walls and mortgage payments. It was proof that I'd survived, that I'd fought back, that I'd won. It was mine. All of it. Forever. Daniel had thought strength meant being loud, aggressive, obvious. He thought removing my name while I was on bed rest was clever, strategic, a clean way to control the outcome. He thought I was too weak to notice, too trusting to question, too broken to fight back. He was wrong about all of it. Real strength wasn't loud. It was patient, strategic, quiet. Real strength was lying in that bed, hearing his betrayal, and staying silent until I had a plan. Real strength was documenting everything, building a case, calling a lawyer from a borrowed phone. Real strength was smiling and nodding and playing the part of the obedient wife while secretly preparing to destroy his entire strategy. He'd underestimated me because I was quiet. He'd assumed silence meant weakness. But silence was where I'd found my power. And when the time came to speak, I'd had all the evidence I needed. He'd lost not because I was ruthless, but because I was prepared. He'd lost because he'd forgotten the oldest rule: never underestimate a quiet person. They're not weak. They're just waiting. I won. Not through anger or revenge or destruction. Not by becoming someone cruel or calculating. I won because I protected myself. Because I'd kept evidence. Because I'd found a document I'd forgotten existed. A document my mother had insisted on, even when it seemed unnecessary. I won because the law protected people who protected themselves. I won because Daniel had been careless in his confidence, assuming I'd never fight back. But most of all, I won because I'd refused to be erased. He'd removed my name from the deed. He'd spent my equity. He'd planned a future that didn't include me. But he'd forgotten one document. One piece of paper that proved I'd always belonged here. And that one document had changed everything. Now I sat in my house, my name on the deed, my signature on the mortgage, my future stretching out before me, and felt complete. Not because I'd destroyed him. Not because I'd gotten revenge. But because I'd survived. Because I'd fought back when fighting seemed impossible. Because I'd reclaimed what was mine. He tried to write me out of a story, but in the end, I was the one still standing. And the house, my house, was exactly where I belonged.